Hey everybody, Bright Guy here, and today I've got a DCS World tutorial with me. For you? Something like that. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about radio navigation in DCS. But first we have some required reading, or required downloads, I guess you could say. So this is the DCS beacon map, carefully and painstakingly put together by Lino Germany's. Lino. Let's call him Lino. Fuck it. Anyway. So, the way you download this is right off the DCS website. You can download it from the user files. If you go download, user files, and type in beacon, not beacon, beacon, first hit right there. Bam, done. He's also got a list of all the beacons. Hello? Beacon. There we go. List of all the DCS World beacons. So this is a chart of every beacon in the Black Sea map as it stands right now. And this is the map version of said chart. Now, I would download both. They're very indispensable. If you plan on doing a long haul trip in an aircraft that doesn't have an INS or a TAD or something like that, then it's useful to look at these maps beforehand, maybe write down on a piece of paper, or if you have got like a little whiteboard, kneeboard, or some sort of notebook that you use as a kneeboard, like all these destinations and frequencies and things like that. So yeah, I would definitely download that. So let's get into how to read this. Alino's done an incredibly good job of making it painstakingly simple, but just for the sake of doing it, let's go over how to read the map. Every airfield has a lot of information on it. Now you're going to look at this and be like, how do read? I don't what? All right, so let's start off with the basics. Name of the airfield, right here. This is Sanaki Kolki, otherwise known as Sanaki. Done. This is the this is the air traffic control frequency in a modern aircraft. This is VHF AM. This would be VHF, and this would also be VHF, but these are for the older aircraft, and you can see on the legend here, this is for the second and third gen fighters. So such as the F-86, the MiG-21, and the MiG-15. So all those frequencies would be here. This is for the World War II aircraft, so something like the 109, Dora, Mustang, and anything else that comes out in the future. Now, some aircraft have presets for radios. Generally speaking, they're pretty good. The MiG-21 has the kneeboard information in there already, and we'll go over that later. But the ARC and the RSBN, as well as all the air traffic control tower frequencies, are in the MiG-21 kneeboard. Now that's like the exception rather than the rule. Something like the A-10 has all the frequencies in the CDU, but you need to go digging for it. And if you don't know how to operate that, then it's no fun at all. But let's start from the very beginning. What is radio navigation? Radio navigation is point A to point B navigation using radio. Now, what the radio does is it emits from a beacon. Generally, it's a NDB or an ARC station, or possibly even a Vortec. In some cases, it's an ILS. Now, the radio comes in a bunch of different flavors. That's what it is. But essentially what it is it's radio emitting in a direction. In the case of something like this, which is an NDB, it's omnidirectional. And you can tune into the frequency of that beacon and navigate to that beacon. If you know the frequency of the beacon, as well as where it is physically located, you can navigate using that. Now, you might not remember where some things are physically located, and that's fine, and that's why we have maps. And, every good aircraft pilot knows maps are indispensable. I mean, you got checklists and maps and maps and checklists. That's all it is. That's pretty much all there is to flying, other than, the skill of flying itself. Now, let's talk about the different flavors. There's ARC, RSBN, NDB, ILS, VOR, TACAN, and another form of ILS. So, let's start from the very top. We have ARC. ARC and NDB are pretty much the same thing. What they are is a omnidirectional beacon that, emits radio in all directions and will emit the radio signal. Generally, what these beacons emit is Morse code at a specific frequency. Now, the Morse code that they emit is going to be this, the Morse character. If they do emit Morse code, this is going to be it. The dash signifies a long pulse, and short pulses are signified by dots with spaces in between. And if you can figure out the Morse, you can figure out what you're tuned into. Or if you alternatively have the frequency and you want to make sure that you're on the right frequency, because sometimes the dials can be a little hard to tune in just right, you can check with the Morse. So that's that. Now, functionally, ARC and NDBs are the same. One's a Russian way of doing it, one's a non-Russian way of doing it. Technically, they're basically the same thing. NDB is non-directional beacon, ARC is something in Russian. Now, there's NDBs and ARCs scattered all throughout the map, and on the MiG-21, which can tune into the ARC, you can find all the ARC locations on the kneeboard, and again, we'll pull that up later. And for reference, all the NDBs that are in the sim are mapped out here with the actual Morse codes and their beacon number. So you might look at something like this and say, okay, that's a little weird, but all it is the name of the beacon, the Morse signifying the beacon, and the ARC signification, the symbol for the ARC here as well. So this doubles as the ARC and NDB station. There's going to be a lot of those. So there's one here south of Maykop. There's one here south of Krasnodar, another east of Krasnodar. They're all over the map. The NDBs and ARCs are generally shorter range than something like a VOR, but for simplicity's sake, let's say in DCS, for the most part, it's line of sight. Like if you can physically draw your eyes to a point on the ground, you'll probably pick up the radio signal from there. So it is modeled in the sim. If you're hidden or if you're obscured by mountains, you can't pick up an NDB. Say you're sitting low south of Minvoti, you can't pick up the NDB from Sukumi or Gadada, or even one from Soki. There's going to be NDBs over here and VORs and whatnot that you can't pick up over here unless you're at altitude. And even then, at altitude, there is a maximum range to these things. Okay, moving on. So this symbol here is a combo of an NDB and an inner or outer marker. Generally, this applies to the marker beacons at airfields. You can see here at Senaki Kolki, we have the ILS frequency, an outer marker, and an inner marker. So it will, if you pass over these beacons with that ILS tuned in, then you'll get those Morse codes and you'll get all the beacons. All right, next up, ILS. This is a little bit of a different video. There are good ILS tutorials out there. I'll be making one soon. ILS is an instrument landing system. It's basically, if you closed out the canopy, if you just blacked out the canopy, you could land at every airfield with an ILS system on instruments alone. So it's called instrument landing system, and that's different from something like a visual flight system or visual flight rules. You have instrument flight rules. So if you ever heard IFR and VFR, it's basically if you're in zero visibility weather, you can still navigate with your instruments. And that's the principle behind the ILS, is you can land with your instruments. Even if there's fog on the ground and you can't see the runway until you're 3 feet above it, that sort of thing. So not every airfield in the sim has ILS. I believe in the NTTR, most, if not all, of the airfields will have an ILS. It's definitely more of a American thing to have everywhere, but by no means is it uncommon here in the Black Sea map. You can see most of the ones in Georgia have them. Sanaki, Kutaisi, Koboleti, Batumi. All the big bases over here have them. So you got one for Tbilisi, you got one for Vazani, and one for Soganluk. Again, these are in Georgia. Now, ILS isn't as common in Russia because they have their own systems. And you can definitely see that. There's a very empty ILS area here. I mean, there's one at Minvodi, and that's pretty much it. If I'm not mistaken, nope, there's one at Beslan and there's one in Nelchik. But yeah, it's not as common throughout Russia because they have their own proprietary system. The PRMG is the Russian equivalent of the ILS. Now, I don't know what it means in Russian, but I can basically tell you it's functionally exactly the same in the sim, and but they're not interoperable. If you have a Russian aircraft that can only deal with the RSBN, you can only land or only use it with airfields that have RSBN supported. ILS will not work with PRMG. PRMG will not work with ILS. The advantage to a PRMG system, if you look here, say Nalchik, you can see that there is a glide slope and an approach vector for this ILS frequency. However, on somewhere where there is multiple approach vectors, see here in an ILS system, you'd have to have two separate frequencies, one for each direction. However, with the RSBN and the PRMG, you can get one frequency for Mozdok, and you can land from either direction. It's actually pretty handy. Say here we have Minvodi. We've got 109.3 at a vector of 295 from the Minvodi runway coming from runway 29. If you were to come in from this direction, you wouldn't get an ILS signal, but you would get a PRMG signal. So that's another advantage to the PRMG system. Next is the VOR, which is standing for a VHF omnidirectional radio range. Well, it would be VORR in an ideal world, but here we go. So VOR is sort of like the Western equivalent of RSBN. RSBN is the Russian standard for radio navigation with distance. The equivalent for civilian aviation in the West is a VOR. So this is a VHF signal that you dial into with the supported equipment, and you get range on it. Something like the A-10C can take advantage of a VOR. In theory, in F-15, any modern aircraft can use a VOR, but not a Russian one, apparently. The VOR is roughly equivalent to the system of RSBN, where you get a radio signal which gives you direction as well as distance. But RSBN is exclusive to the Russian military aviation, I believe, whereas VOR is in use for civilian as well as military. Lots of airliners use VORs. I mean, if you've ever played another flight sim, you've heard VOR before. If you've ever wondered what it was, that's it. Now, TACAN is the equivalent of military RSBN. TACAN will give you precise information in terms of direction, range, and in some cases as well as altitude. So you have air-to-air TACAN. So if you're trying to find a tanker in the A-10C, there is a TACAN feature where you can home onto the tanker's TACAN signal and find him that way, instead of, pressing F10 and hoping for the best. And it's predominantly used by Western, or I should say NATO forces, because it was developed by the United States and has been widely implemented from there on. And last but not least is the RSBN and PRMG, which is again the Russian equivalent to VOR and ILS, which we've talked about. And all of these have Morse codes that we can look up in yonder chart. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's nice and all. I understand all these 3-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms and, dial in the frequency to do the thing and the time and the place, but how do I actually use it? Well, to use radio navigation, we have to talk about a flight plan. So say, let's do something simple. We want to take off from Sanaki Kolki, and we want to fly a predetermined route east along the paralleling the Caucasus here, and then at a certain NDB, say this one here, or a certain point, which happens to be just north of Gori, we're going to turn a different heading, we're going to fly over the mountains, and we're going to go land at Beslan. How would we go about doing that? Well, let's jump in the cockpit. We'll talk it out. But before we get into the cockpit, we need to outline our flight plan. Today we'll be taking a 2-ship of L-39s eastbound out of Kutaisi. From Kutaisi, we'll be flying east along the Caucasus, paralleling them until we reach NDB Alley at 353.0 kilohertz, followed by NDB Gori, and then followed again by NDP Mukrani, leading us directly into Tbilisi city, and we're going to land at Tbilisi Lachini, and our PRMG will take us all the way in. So, let's have at it. So originally I wanted to do this in the F-86 because I think that's a good example of how to do NDB navigation. It's only got an NDB for navigation, nothing else. Turns out it doesn't work. Neither does the MiG-15, which operates on the same sort of code base as this. And the Mi-8 and the Ka-50 turns out don't support NDB ADF navigation, funnily enough. But luckily, it turns out that the L-39 is in fact the perfect platform for learning ADF navigation. So, let's jump right on in, shall we? L-39 ADF, really easy. Flick this switch into the automatic position as the first switch, and then this one down to the TLG, that's telegraph position. We've got our first NDB dialed in at 350, but we have 353 for our frequency, so we just move the big white knob to the 3. Change our volume around a little bit, and that's all set. So we are landing at Tbilisi Lachini. We hope to use the RSBN system, so we're dialing in 11 for our navigation and 11 for our landing. Now, what you may or may not be able to see is that the small compass needle that our ADF uses was actually posted straight up at 0 in the stowed position. But once we turned on our ADF and got that all sorted out, you can see that in fact it is pointing away. Now it's the one that's pointing like off to the left there, like a little north of 270. And I was trying to find the right RSBN station here. But yeah, you can see it there, pointing at about 285 roughly. Yeah, right there. So that's your ADF sort of navigation compass screen thing, if you will. And as long as you have that straight ahead, the needle pointing straight up, you're heading in the right direction, and you've got nothing to worry about and you're home free. Now, just after takeoff here in the L-39, we can see that our NDB needle is pointing slightly to the right, so in order to correct that and fly directly toward the NDB that we're trying to aim at, we would have to correct until the needle is pointing basically straight up. We would be correcting right, approximately 30 degrees or so, given that current needle reading. Alright, so here's where it would get a little bit tricky. You can see in the L-39 there's that flashing marker light there on the up front panel. In most other aircraft there wouldn't tend to be a marker light there, but you can see that the needle that was pointing directly in front of us was now pointing directly behind us, and we switched our frequency over to the next NDB and now it's pointing in front of us again. So that's the thing about the NDB. Once you fly over it, the needle's going to get a little wobbly and then it'll start turning around because the signal will now be behind you. So you have to acknowledge that and then go to the next one. Now here again is another instance of the marker beacon flashing up, and you can actually see me looking around for the station itself. These are physical stations modeled in the sim, and you can find them. They're just basically little tiny radio towers with a building next to them, and I was trying to look out the window and find it. But you can see that the needle wobbled a little bit. Now it's turned behind us, and I'm trying to switch over to the Tbilisi VOR, but for whatever reason, it's not picking up on it in the ADF. So I don't think the L-39 quite has the vortex stuff modeled, or maybe I'm just doing it wrong. Probably I'm just doing it wrong, but it's good to know that, you know, if we're coming into Tbilisi like that, at that point it would be visual only. You know, we've traveled the NDBs that we knew we were going to do, and we're close enough we can probably see the runway lights, so we're good from there. And that's pretty much it. We were clear all the way into Tbilisi. We did a VFR landing. Our RSPN turned out to just not work, I guess through probably our fault, but it's more likely it's just not modeled yet, not implemented yet. That's understandable. It's very early open beta for the Albatros, and I expect it'll be coming sometime in the near-ish future. And you can probably tell by the video that I'm really bad at landing this bird. It, on one hand, really likes to be slow, but the second you put the flaps down and put the gear down, it just buffets and like is always riding the verge of a stall. But yeah, so things I want to do in the future, I want to do a proper RSBN and you know, VORTAC, you know, TACAN, ILS, ARC, RSBN, like, I know I said RSBN again already. All that stuff with the MiG, the A-10, and whatever other modules decide to support it. And I hope you guys will stick around for that video, but this is going to end here on the landing for the Albatros. Yeah, I think radio navigation isn't that hard, and if you have the charts and you have the lists of stuff, and you can open it up, that chart, in Microsoft Photo Viewer, and you can open up the big reference sheet in Excel or whatever, and just use Control F to find the frequencies, or if you know the name, you can see the names of the NDBs in the mission editor. That's one thing that the beacon map doesn't actually have, is the names of the NDBs. That's more left to the reference chart, as it were. So, or I should say the reference spreadsheet, because technically it's a beacon chart, beacon map, whatever. Anyway, so enjoy this little landing. I hope you enjoyed this video series. Now, mind you, this will be a series. I do intend to cover the MiG-21 and all the other modules in their full radio navigation glory. That is, if they're willing to cooperate. I'm looking at you, MiG-21 activator. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what happened there. From my point of view, it looked like his wing just went just a smidge over mine, but as you'll see in a second, the network lag kind of catches up and figures it out and says, nah, you guys definitely collided, so deal with it. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for me. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. It raises the video in the search results so other people can learn too. And if you want to see more, subscribe. I'd love to see you guys around. So, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.